Hey family, welcome back to my channel, Sasha for God. I just want to take the time to let you know that about the contest that we are having. You just need to be subscribed and comment in any of my videos to be entered into the contest. The winner will be announced on March 1st during a live video. Okay. I really don't want to do this. Have you ever felt God speak to your heart so much that it hurts so bad, and the only way to stop that pain is just by giving in? Well, this is kind of like that. I feel like that I've went my whole life and all I have are my memories. And so I keep it hidden down deep inside because they belong to me. God wants me to share, and I think he's doing this because he wants to remind me that those memories don't just belong to me, that he was with me all along. So they're his as well. When I was about 8 years old, I began having nightmares about this house and a lady. Every time I woke up out of this nightmare, the only thing I remembered was that lady, the house, and I saw my family, my brothers, my sisters were in this nightmare, my mom. And then I also saw a demon. I remembered every inch of that house from my dreams, and I started to draw pictures of that house. I just couldn't understand why, I couldn't understand why this house was constantly coming up in my nightmares. So one day my mom was washing dishes, and I walked up to her with my pictures in hand. I explained to my mom that I had been having nightmares about a house. I then showed my mom the picture, hoping that she could provide some answers because, when you're 8 years old, your mom has all the answers, right? My mom looked at the pictures that I drew, and I could see this look on her face. She calmly told me that it was a house we used to live in when I was younger. She told me the name of the street, the city in Ohio that this house was located on. I further pressed my mom and asked if something bad happened in this house because I was having such nightmares, and I saw a demon in this house, and it scared me, my dreams, and I felt like something bad had happened in this house. Now, my mom, who is normally a calm and sweet mother, all of a sudden began to scream at me. She got so defensive and told me that she was a good mother. I cried and went to my room so confused. I just sat there shaking, and I could not understand why she got so mad. I just knew I had to find my answers, but I learned that it wasn't okay to discuss this house. The lady in my dreams, or the evil demon that came to me in that house in my nightmare. So I kind of suppressed that and didn't discuss it with anyone else after that. Over the next 5 years, my nightmares continued. It was the same nightmare over and over. Throughout these years, I was also being pulled out of school to visit my brothers in prison. I had 2 brothers who were always in and out of prison. My family was a big family. My brothers were Jesse, Kevin, Ronald, Philip, and my sisters were Tisha, Renee, and Darlene. I also had two other sisters, but they died in a fire when they were babies. So I never really knew them because they died before I was born. Now it was Jesse and Kevin. They were on drugs, doing criminal activities, and in and out of prison. Along with my nightmares, I also remember going to bed every night and crying myself to sleep. I was already going to church since I was about 6 or 7, but it wasn't until I was about 9 years old before I actually began to know God. So at about 9 years old, God became my everything. He was my best friend, and my shoulder to cry, he was everything, you know. At night, I would cry so hard for my brothers because even at that age, I knew they were on drugs. My heart broke for them so much that I mourned over them. Every single night, I cried so hard to God to help them. Nothing could ever console me. I laid awake in my room just crying and talking to God. From the age of about 9 until I was 15, God became everything to me. He showed me things and He gave me comfort when I felt like there was no one else. When I turned 14, I got brave and decided, well, one more time, I'm going to try to find out what I could about this house. Something kept telling me to ask my sister Renee. But I was still a little hesitant because I remembered my mom's reaction and I didn't know if I would get the same reaction from Renee. So I treaded lightly. I went to her and asked her if we could talk. She sat down with me and I told her everything. I told her about all the years of nightmares. I told her how I tried to talk to Mom about it when I was 8 years old and how she got mad. I gave her the pictures I drew of the house, and Renee began to cry like a baby. She wanted to know how I remembered this house. Again, I told her this house is in my nightmares. She began to tell me how much evil had happened in this house. She told me how she had been, and this is hard for me to say, molested by a babysitter over and over again. She said it got to where she pretended to be asleep. So, and when she would pretend to be asleep, the babysitter would then start to molest me. And she said she felt bad for that, but she didn't know what else to do. By the time she finished telling me the story, we were both crying so hard. I thanked her for telling me because, you know, that explains the house, the lady, the evil demon. She told me that I was only 3 years old when we lived in that house, so she couldn't understand how I was able to even remember it in my dreams. She also told me that when I was that little, that our mother was a different person back then. She told me that she would always leave us with that lady while she went out drinking. I never blamed my mom. Maybe she was younger back then and made mistakes like we all do. But the mother she was to me after that was that of a great mom who truly worked hard for her kids and made sure that they had what they needed. I led a very sheltered life. I went to church. My brothers hurt me more than anything because I just wanted them to be okay. I wanted them to live, to get off drugs, to stop going to prison so we could be a family. My mom met my stepfather, and to me, oh my goodness, he was the smartest, the best man I have ever known. Even up to this day, I've never seen a man like him, ever. He loved my mom and stood by my mom's side throughout everything, throughout her son's drugs and prison issues, helping to raise her kids as his very own. I always said that in my eyes, God is way up there, on levels. God is way up there. He's the highest level. But right underneath him, directly underneath God, is my father. Because, he was almost perfect. I never heard him lie. He never used anger. He was just almost perfect. I loved how we sat at the table for hours and hours talking about God. Even at a young age, he used to take us out. He showed us how to appreciate nature and how to see the beauty in it. And we loved our fishing trips. Now at 15, I'm still staying in my room, still crying out to God at night. I did get out from time to time with my sister, Tisha. Tisha, she was kind of more closer to my age. So we did everything together. We used to hang out with friends, go skating, and see movies as well as the mall. But for the most part, I wanted to be in my room, listening to music and just keeping my mind on God. And I love to study, just read the Bible, even though, sometimes during part of my childhood, sometimes I just couldn't understand it. We'll get to that here in a minute. But I remember that I always had an understanding of the Bible since a very young age, because at first I couldn't understand, like I was saying, I couldn't understand a word of it. It killed my soul that I couldn't understand. So I went to my Sunday school teacher one Sunday, Brother Jerry, and I told him what I was going through and how I wanted to understand the Bible. I remember how he just looked at me with his big smile and whispered in my ear, saying, "Go to God with all your heart and ask God for wisdom and understanding." That's all I needed to do? Okay. I did that. I did that exactly what he said. Still nothing. I did it again. Still nothing. I got so desperate and felt so disgusted with myself that I blamed myself. I got down on my hands and knees and told God how my heart yearns just to understand his words. I asked for understanding that's when God, and I hate to keep saying that, God speaks to me, but God, he does. I don't hear his voice, but he speaks to my heart. So that's when God said, in my own time, not yours. So when I heard those words in my heart, I knew God would give me understanding when he was good and ready. Once God gave me the understanding, though, I literally cried with joy as I flipped through the pages. It was all making sense and coming together, just like a story. I was so happy and thankful to God because I knew that it was him that performed that miracle for me. At 15 years old, my nightmares were starting to taper off. The pain of my brother's drug addiction and criminal activities still hurt me, but I was coping much better at this point, thanks to God. One night, after everyone was fast asleep, I was laying awake, like always, talking to God, and I heard a knock at the door. Now, at this time, my brother Jesse was in prison. Kevin was at home from prison, and Philip was home from the army. When I heard the knock, I knew it was my brothers, Kevin and Philip. Kevin at this time was 22 years old, and Philip was about 25. I went down to let my brothers in. They were there to pick up a change of clothes because they planned to be out all night with their girlfriends and party. I had remembered earlier that day, my mom got a phone call from Philip's best friend's mother, and she was telling my mom that her son, Jim, which is Philip's best friend, was in the hospital and he wasn't doing well. Something told me not to tell them about Philip's friend being in the hospital and to just let my mom tell Philip. But I told Philip his friend Jim was in the hospital in Kettering. I told him that it was pretty serious. I waited for my brothers to finish so I could lock the door after they left. I remember how my mom used to tell my brothers not to come in drinking, and I knew my brothers were drinking, so I started joking with them by saying, "Get out," because this is how my mom used to do when she didn't want them coming in. She would say, "Get out. Don't come in here drinking late at night." So I was even picking at them and joking with them even as they were walking out the door. I said, "Don't you come back here." Kevin had just walked off the porch and I yelled at him, "And don't you come back either." When all of a sudden I heard a voice that said, "They aren't coming back." I knew from my connection to God to take that warning seriously. I yelled out and called my brother Kevin. In a slow motion, he turned around and looked at me, and our eyes locked. I wanted to say, "Be careful," but I couldn't get the words out, and I didn't want him to tell me how stupid I was. So I said nothing. Absolutely nothing. So he yelled back at me and cursed and said, "What is it?" I shrugged my shoulders and said, "Nothing. Go on." I didn't even ask God to keep his hand over him and to protect him. And they walked off. The next day, okay, I'm going to try to get through this because this is very hard, but I'm going to try. The next day, my sister, Tisha, came into my room to talk and listen to music with me. We were listening to the new song by the Jets, "Make It Real," when all of a sudden we heard our mom cry out. So we ran to my window and the police were outside. At that time, I just shook my head because I thought it was just them coming to tell us again that my brother Kevin had been arrested. I already knew Jesse was in jail, so I knew it wasn't about him. So I just thought that maybe they were there to tell my mom that my other brother was arrested. I told my sister, let's go see what they're saying. So we sneaked around, out of my bedroom. We sneaked and we were at the top of the steps. So, as we were sitting on top of the steps, we were trying to be sneaky and listen to see what we could hear. And when all of a sudden, Officer Stephen came to the bottom of the stairs and caught us. Now, Officer Stevens was by this time a family friend and always stopped by to let us know when one of my brothers had been arrested. He said, "Girls, can you come downstairs and have a seat for me?" We had never done this before, or he had never done this before. So we kind of looked at each other really confused because we didn't know what we did. We were good girls, you know. When we got to the bottom of the stairs, we looked over to our right to where the front door was, and we saw my mom laying there on the ground, on the floor, and she was sobbing. The other officer who was with Stevens was trying to help my mom up. By this time, we were more confused and worried about my mom. We thought something was wrong with her. We sat down at the dining room table, as he asked us to do, and we could tell he was trying to find the words, but the more he struggled to find words, the more angry I became and didn't want to hear one word he was about to say. And then came, "Girls, there's been an accident with your brothers. Your brother Kevin didn't make it." And Philip is not expected to make it through the night. I cried out and I called him a liar. I said, "Don't you come in here and say that. It's bad enough to hear every time one of them had been arrested. Now this?" Then I wanted to know how it happened. I had just seen them last night, and I didn't tell my mom that I let them in, and she had already made it clear she didn't want them coming in drunk. So I never told her I saw them until that moment. My mom was so inconsolable at the moment, you know, as we all were, so I didn't go into further details. Officer Stevens told me and Tisha that they were driving back from Dayton, that they were visiting a friend in the hospital, and stopped for some beers at Monopoly Bar in Kettering before driving back, and had a fatal car accident. No other vehicles were involved. They hit an embankment. Kevin went flying out of the car, and Philip was thrown to the back of the car. As the car flipped, it flipped on top of my brother Kevin. He died instantly, they said. At this time, my sister Renee was at her house, and she said something had told her to get to her mother's house. While the police were busy trying to contact my dad at work to get him to come home, I looked outside and saw Renee sitting in her car. It looked like she was crying. When I opened the screen door, I kind of motioned for her to come inside, and she just sat there and shook her head. No. She didn't want to hear any bad news. Yet she knew in her heart. She got out of the car and said, you know, she kind of yelled out over at me and said, "Something told me to come. What's wrong?" Then the officer came up behind me and he asked me, "Who is that?" And I said, "Well, that's my sister, Renee." And he told her to come in. She saw that we were all crying, and she screamed again, "What's wrong?" She cried. When the officer told her, she cried so hard. She just kept saying, "No, no, no." We were all so close, but Renee had a deep connection with Kevin. Jesse had that same connection with Kevin and Renee. Now, after a while, my dad had finally arrived from work, and Officer Stevens had told him what happened. My aunt and uncle also lived in Dayton, so my uncle explained to Officer Stevens that he would go on over to the hospital and be with Philip until we arrived. We quickly grabbed some clothes, and me, my mom, my dad, Tisha, Renee, we all left for the hospital. We lived about 45 minutes to an hour away from that hospital that was located in Kettering. I couldn't stop crying the whole way to the hospital. I blamed myself. I didn't take that voice serious enough when it said that they weren't going to come back. Why didn't I stop them from leaving? And why did I tell Philip that his friend Jim was in the hospital? Why? Now, when we got to the hospital, my uncle was already at the door waiting for us at the entrance of the hospital. He already knew that his sister, my mom, was going to be a mess. And she was. She immediately demanded to see Kevin. And my uncle told her, "You don't want to see him like that." Because my uncle had already seen him. He didn't want my mom to see him because it was bad. She began to scream at him. She wanted to see him. So the doctor came out and spoke to my mom and explained the same thing, that she didn't want to hear it. But, she didn't want to hear it. So they mentioned Philip to her, thinking that might take her mind off Kevin for a minute. They explained that Philip was dying and we needed to go say our goodbyes. My mom and dad went in first, and then my mom came out to get us one by one because she didn't want us to go in there alone. I remember that Renee and Tisha didn't want to go in first, so I went in first. My mom stopped me at the door, and she told me that it was okay if I couldn't do it, that he was in really bad shape. All I could think was all that night, or all I could think of was all the nights I cried to God for my brother. And now I lost one, and in a matter of hours, I'll lose another. I took a deep breath and said, I need to see him. So I walked into that room, and I stopped at the door, and I saw a person that was bloated like a balloon. My mother was skinny. He just got home from the army, and he was in shape. I looked at my mom, and I said, that's not him. My mom placed her hand on my shoulder, and we moved closer to his bed, and all of a sudden, this guy kind of lifted his head up, and he was having like convulsions, and he was groaning, and it's scary. It was just, I don't know. I saw a man with a face the size of a pumpkin, tubes running down his mouth, and blood everywhere. I screamed and ran, and I didn't know where I was going, but I ran. The hospital chaplain, who was on his way to my brother's room, ended up stopping me. My mom was, I guess, running right behind me because she was right directly behind me, asking me if I was all right. The chaplain was there, standing there with his hand on my back. Heck no. I mean, I wasn't okay. That guy in that bed was not my brother. That was a monster. We spoke with the nurse and told her what happened. The nurse explained to my mom in the best possible medical way she could. And I still didn't understand how he was able to have those convulsions and why he was doing all that. And why, his whole body and his face was so swollen and beaten up that he was so unrecognizable. My mom asked me if I was ready to go back in and try it again. I agreed. I went back into the room. This time I was a little braver. I walked right up to his bed along with my mom. I picked his hand. I put his hand in mine. But I just couldn't say goodbye. I just cried and I told him how much I love him. I told him how funny he is and how hard he makes me laugh. What will we do without you? Then I heard God's voice in my heart again. And this time he said Kevin had to go, but this one will live. Last time I didn't warn my brothers to be careful or to pray for them, for God to keep his hands over them. This time I will tell what God says so I can bring hope to at least my mom. So I looked at my mom and said, "Please don't cry. Philip won't die." Now, you could look at Philip and clearly see that he was dying. But my mom asked me, "How do you know that?" And I told her how God told me that. She really wanted to believe me, but she could only go by what the doctors were telling her. Later that night, my uncle kept trying to get us to go home with him. My mom wouldn't leave because the doctors kept telling her that it was just a matter of time, any time now that, he would pass away. We were sitting in the waiting room, tired, feeling numb, and watching the news. All of a sudden, right there on the news, you could see where someone, like literally, I don't know if it's the camera guy, but you could tell that someone had just taken a beer can and shook it up and caused the whole can to start spinning. And you could see the car on top of my brother and his feet with his socks on. The only thing you could really see of my brother was his feet. Now, when Kevin used to drive, he always drove with his shoes off. So that's, like I said, that's pretty much what you could see of him. And I could not understand why they would show that on news. But I believe they showed that to make an example of him, of what drinking and driving can do to you. My mom saw that and she literally lost her mind. I don't think she was ever the same after that. She screamed and my uncle and dad had to take her out of there. We ended up staying at my uncle's for 2 months. God was true to his word as always, and he let my brother live. But he was in a coma for 45 days. During this time, we had the funeral for Kevin. The prison allowed my brother Jesse to come, but they took him in to see Kevin just before the funeral, and no one except for my mom was allowed inside. We waited outside and we saw the officers walk my brother inside. He was shackled and had on handcuffs, but they allowed him to wear a suit. which was nice. We all knew how hard he took the news when they told him in prison. It's sad because there was just nothing you could do. The warden had told my mom that he absolutely lost it. He threw chairs, he's kicked, screamed. He told my mom that they had to leave him in the room and just let him mourn before taking him back to his cell. At the funeral home, a few seconds after they walked him in, you could hear him weeping all the way outside. The guards felt so bad that they took off the handcuffs. And my mom said he reached in and put a note in Kevin's pocket and kept putting his face on his chest. Outside, we heard him yell, "Come back." After 45 days, Philip woke up from his coma. He couldn't walk, speak, or remember anything. After months of therapy, we still had not told Philip that Kevin had died. All Philip knew really was that he was in a serious car accident, and that's why he was in the hospital, because of brain injury and swelling. It took so long for him to start talking again. He was starting to walk again, and it was confusing, but he was really confusing our names. Once he started to be able to talk again, he started to confuse our names with our faces. He would call me Renee, and he would call Renee Tisha, or he was very confused. And I guess that's part of the brain injury that he suffered. Now, the brother who always had a smile and made me laugh so much was now very angry. But we were told that this was normal. One day, my uncle was sitting at the hospital with Philip so that my mom could go home and shower. Philip looked at my uncle and said, "Where's Kevin?" And he began to cry because memories were starting to come back to him. And at that moment he remembered Kevin was with him in the car. He knew everyone was visiting him except for Kevin. And for months, every time he was able to even spit out Kevin's name, which was very hard for him to do, we would tell him Kevin was at work. Now he just knew. My uncle went to get the social worker at the hospital, and they together ended up telling my brother what had happened. My uncle called my mom and told her before she had a chance to get back to the hospital that Philip knew about Kevin and that he had to be told and couldn't put it off anymore. When my mom got to the hospital, he just looked at my mom and cried. She hugged him, and he told her how sorry he was. But from that moment on, he always blamed himself. He always thought my mom wished he had died and Kevin had lived. He always thought that if we thought he was driving, we would just blame him. He always said he didn't remember who was driving, but we all feel like it was Kevin because he didn't have shoes on, and he always removed his shoes when driving. I mourned Kevin's death for 3 years because, like Philip, I had so much guilt. No one was ever the same in my family. So by the time I reached 17, I had a boyfriend. And he was really nice. He was a nice guy. But like a dummy, we both decided to get married. I felt like I'd lived through so much pain. And I felt like if I just moved out, that pain would stop. So we got married. We were both just so young and really not mature enough to have jumped into that responsibility. But we tried to make it work, and we stayed together for about 7 years. And then we got divorced. But no matter how much you try to make something work, sometimes if you're so young and you get yourself into something that you're not ready for, no matter how much you care about somebody, it's not going to work out anyway. And, it was just a bad situation. After this, my brother Jesse had a friend named Mike. He also was in and out of prison with my brother Jesse, and that's how they met and became friends. Now, Mike became good friends of my family through my brother Jesse. I always had a crush on him. He was 10 years older than me, so of course, I'm pretty sure he wasn't looking at me in that way, but for me, how girls have crushes. But we started seeing each other when I was 25 and he was 35. I always knew he was a bad boy, but you know how that is. We all go through that phase, the tough Italian bad boy. My brother Jesse was fit to be tied when he found out. He wrote Mike from prison and threatened him, and then he wrote him again and said, "Don't do anything to my sister that you don't want me to do to your sister." But after a while, Jesse accepted it, and I'll be honest, trying to live with a criminal was not easy at all. Mike had a strong belief in God, but he was a criminal. Mike shielded me the best that he could from that life, but it became a problem for me when it got to where I couldn't go out alone. I only had so long inside a store, and our baby was kept even more shielded. He had a lot of enemies that wanted him dead, and my life was also at risk because of my association with him. I was becoming more and more depressed, but I loved this guy. I hadn't visited family, and Mike got, during this time, he ended up getting shot in the back of the head. And as a result of poor care in the hospital, he ended up coming home with a huge bed sore and a drug addiction because of the pain, and was in a wheelchair. I spent the next 2 years working with him and got him well. I even had a doctor who shook my hand and asked me how I got his bed sore to heal so well. Mike's drug addiction continued, and sometimes he would stay gone for days at a time. Mike knew my hatred for drugs and what drugs and alcohol did to my family. I despised it. One night, God came and spoke to me again. He told me to tell Mike that he is going to turn from his life of crime and drugs and give his life to him fully, or he will take his legs, which Mike loved his legs. He loved running track. I mean, he did everything with his legs. Then he said, I'll take his family, and then I'll take his life. But in the end, he will be mine. Let me tell you, when he said take his family, I was scared. Was God really going to take us just to get him to change his heart? I really believed my life and our daughter's life was at risk. And if he didn't repent, we would suffer death. I know God's voice, so I knew that it was true. I begged and begged Mike, and he actually allowed himself to withdraw. But he got really deathly ill and almost died trying to quit drugs on his own. And in all honesty, unless you have the insurance or money, you don't really get the help you need. But I believe if he had pushed hard enough, he could have found that help. It's very hard and so dangerous to even try to withdraw on your own. But with my help and an extreme amount of pain, he was able to do it for a while. After he got shot, he always said that the amount of pain he was in was so unbearable that he wished he were dead, that the drugs were the only thing that helped ease the pain. Mike went back to the drugs, and he ended up cutting his foot while he was outside on the porch one day, and he was high. After he went back to drugs, all he did was stay high, shooting up heroin, oxy, or anything he could get his hands on. At this point, I was just so mentally gone. In the back of my mind, I never forgot what God warned. I was becoming angry because I felt like he just didn't care if he lost everything. His foot ended up setting up gangrene, and they had to amputate his foot. I knew what was coming next. So when Mike got out of the hospital, he learned quickly how to get around on his crutches so he could go get his drugs. I stayed home taking care of the kids in our home, and I just let him do his thing. I was talking more and more to my family and was trying to hide a little money here and there so I could invite my family for Christmas. I hadn't seen my family for so long, and I missed them. I was excited that I was going to be seeing them for Christmas. I was able to save up to $1,500 for Christmas without Mike finding out. I moved the money back and forth between the car and the house. So when I left the house, the money went with me. So we're going on probably maybe a week and a half before Christmas. I came back one day from the store. I went grocery shopping, and I accidentally left the money in an envelope in the glove box in the car. All $1,500. When I got back, Mike asked for the keys to the car, and I didn't think anything of it, so I gave him the keys, and he left. Well, it got to be pretty late, and he still had not come home. The next day, I woke up, and he still was not home. I didn't think anything of it. Still, I went about my day cleaning, bathing the kids like I usually do, the same old routine, cooking. And when it was time to put the kids to bed, it had dawned on me. I literally fell to my knees and cried. I left my money in the car. My money for my family's Christmas dinner. The money for my kids' Christmas. My heart literally sank to the pit of my stomach, and I ran to the restroom and vomited. I thought, no way. Mike is my best friend. He's loyal. Respect and loyalty is just everything to him. He won't buy drugs with my kids' money. That's what I thought. So I went to bed, woke up, and he came home probably around 3 p.m. that day. As soon as I saw him, I zipped out the door as quick as I could. I ran right past him, and I ran as fast as I could to the car. I opened the glove box. My envelope was there. And when I looked inside, every penny was gone. I stood there with that envelope in my hand, with tears streaming down my face. That was the moment I lost my mind. I just stood there. I took a deep breath, went back inside, and I started to yell at him. You just took my kids' Christmas. You knew my family was coming. How could you do this? And all he could do was look down and say he was sorry. I yelled at him. I said, go back to whatever drug dealer you gave my money to, and you get my money back, I yelled. And he just kept saying, I can't do that. And I knew he couldn't do that, but that's what I wanted him to do. I was so mad, I literally lost my mind. I was always so good to him, and I had been through hell with him. Hell, when I say I've been to hell with him, I've been to hell and back, literally, with him. He even made a statement once that he believed I would follow after him into hell and fight Satan himself for him, and I loved him so much I would have in a minute. He was everything to me. I knew in my heart that I would never leave him. So it scared me when God said he would take his family from him, because I knew that would be the only way I would ever leave. I knew if I left him, he would die. He wanted to die, and I lived to make him live, to keep him alive, because I knew if he died, a part of me would die, and I knew I would never be okay if that happened. Now, I'm not a beer drinker, okay? I drink a glass of wine every now and then, but I hate the taste of beer. I don't like beer. But I went into the kitchen and I stole his 40-ounce beer. I went into the bathroom, I locked the door, and I started to drink it. Mike had medication. I think it was Soma in the medicine cabinet. And I was so mentally gone, so mentally and physically and spiritually drained. There was nothing in me. I took that whole bottle and downed it with alcohol. After getting all the pills down, I went into the living room and I laid down on the couch and I finished up the beer. I didn't tell Mike what I had just done. I just wanted to lay there and not wake up. I think I passed out for a split second because all I remember, and this was the last thing I remember, was rolling off the couch and splitting my head open on the coffee table. I remember hearing Mike scream my name, and after that, I don't remember anything until I saw myself laying there with about 8 or 9 cops and ambulances working on me. They were all around me. I remember how it felt, and I saw myself laying there. And what they were doing to me was hurting. It hurt. So it felt like I had pinched one of the paramedics so hard on her hip. I didn't mean to do that. I think I was fighting to live. That vision of me seeing myself like that lasted only a few seconds, because after that I went into a dark place. This dark place was black. You couldn't see anything. You only floated around in pure darkness. I was aware that I was there, but you could feel the blackness. I could feel loneliness and the misery of this blackness that covered me. It's not anything I could explain to make it to where I could make you understand. And there was no escape from this place. There was no memory, no memory of anything. Like my kids, I wasn't able to think of them. I wasn't able to think of anything that was going on, or any past memories, any future memories. I only felt things there in this place. The loneliness, I felt that in the darkness, made me feel misery and grief and so much sorrow. It felt like I was stuck in that place for forever. I wasn't aware of nothing, only that I was there, floating in a thick darkness full of misery, sadness, and loneliness. I couldn't think at all, only feel. You guys, I can only get so much into this video, but I will be uploading part 2 pretty soon. So thank you again for watching my part 1, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe, so that you guys can be entered into the contest. Like I had told you earlier, you just have to be subscribed and comment in any of my videos to be entered. Part 2 will be uploaded sometime tomorrow. I hope you enjoyed.